The Razer Blade 16 is arguably one of the fastest gaming laptops available right now for its form. It's insanely powerful, ridiculously expensive, and it's somehow just 0.69 inches thin. Is it perfect? Not even close. Is it overkill? Probably. But it's also a bold statement about what's possible in a premium Windows laptop this size. And on the other side, we have Apple's MacBook Pro 16 with the M4 Max chip. It's quieter, cooler, more efficient, and unapologetically locked into Apple's ecosystem. It's not built for gaming though, that's a conversation that Apple's slowly getting into, but it crushes in creative workflows, all while sipping power and lasting all day. You see, these are two of the most powerful and portable 16-inch laptops you can buy, but they come from two completely different worlds. But despite their different philosophies, both are now appealing to the same crowd. We've got creators, developers, designers, even those diving into AI workflows. So the real question is, which one actually makes sense for you? That is, if you have more than $4,000 to spend on a laptop. Look, these machines aren't even pretending to be budget friendly, but there is a market for this kind. The Blade 16, as spec'd here, comes with AMD's Ryzen 9 HX 370 with 12 CPU cores, 32 GB of RAM, a 2 TB Gen 4 SSD, and an RTX 5090 laptop GPU with 24 GB of VRAM, all for $4,500 US. And the MacBook Pro 16 I've got here, fully maxed out. The M4 Max chip with a 16-core CPU, 40-core GPU, 120 GB of unified memory, 2 TB of storage. That'll run you $5,550 US. You can spec this with 64 GB of memory, which costs about the same as the Blade. If your wallet's still conscious after hearing that, congrats. The rest of us are just gonna look at our bank accounts and cry. Anyways, you see the price tag. Now let's look at the actual packaging. The Blade 16 sticks to that Razer's familiar design language. It's a boxy shape with sharp edges, CNC milled aluminum chassis, and the signature green lit Razer logo at the lid. It looks premium and stealthy, but just like every other matte black laptop, it's a total fingerprint magnet. On the other hand, the MacBook Pro's exterior design hasn't changed all that much in the last 4 years. I mean, the most noticeable update actually came with the M3 lineup, which is this new space black finish that looks very sleek, but it also shows fingerprints. Its design leans into softer curves and rounded corners that flows consistently across the chassis. Even the lid and the display feel perfectly matched. I think it's something I like about this laptop. It's very clean, it's minimal, and cohesive. Build quality on both of these laptops, they're top tier, but I think Apple takes the edge over here just because the MacBook's hinge, for example, it just feels smoother and fluid, while the Blade's hinge has a bit of that wobbly, loose feel. There's also some flex in the keyboard and especially the palm rest area, whereas the MacBook Pro, I mean, this thing just feels like a solid slab of metal. One-hand open test, both pass, but Apple makes it just a bit more comfortable thanks to the deeper groove on the front lip. It's just a lot more forgiving for those who don't have longer nails. Physically, they share nearly identical form factors. I mean, technically, the MacBook Pro is 0.77 millimeters thinner, but they both weigh around 4.7 pounds or roughly 2.15 kilos. So the difference is barely noticeable in everyday use. Moving on to the I/O, this round easily goes to the Blade 16. I mean, for a laptop this powerful and thin, it's surprisingly well equipped. So you get two USB-C ports, one of which supports Thunderbolt 4 and 100 watts of power delivery, three USB-A 3.2 Gen 2 ports, HDMI 2.1 headphone jack, and you even get a full-size UHS 2 card reader. That's a lot of flexibility, especially for creators. The MacBook Pro 16, on the other hand, it just keeps it clean and minimal. You only get three USB-C Thunderbolt 5 ports and a full-size SDXC card reader, a headphone jack, and that's about it. But I've got to say, MagSafe is honestly underrated. It's fast, super convenient, it's reversible, it has a little charging LED to show the status, and the braided cable even matches the space black finish, which is a nice touch. Plus, the 140-watt USB-C power brick is surprisingly compact and lightweight. It barely takes up space in my backpack compared to the Blade 16's 280 watt GAN charger, which is thick, braided, and honestly kind of a pain to pack. I know I, for one, value space on my backpack, especially when I'm traveling with all of my camera gear to shows like Computex, for example. So if you're someone who likes to keep your everyday carry minimal, just be aware of these extra items. The Blade's power cable is noticeably longer than the MacBook's, which can actually be super handy in setups where the nearest outlet isn't within reach. As for the MacBook, while its compact power adapter is great for portability, it can feel a bit flimsy when plugging directly into a wall. And depending on the outlet orientation, it might even block nearby plugs. Now let's talk about the keyboard and trackpad, because this is where the user experience really starts to diverge. So the Blade 16 comes with Razer's signature perky RGB keyboard. And honestly, it is one of the best in the game. The lighting is vibrant, clean, and has minimal bleed around the keys. Razer is one of the few brands that actually gets keyboard lighting done right. They've also improved these switches with this generation, offering 1.5 millimeters of key travel, which feels snappy and responsive. It's not mechanical, but for gaming and general use, it gets a job done. It's seriously a whole lot better than some of the previous Blades from the past. You also get a dedicated row of macro keys, which is super handy. Through Razer Synapse, you can map them to launch apps, control streaming software. You can also program custom shortcuts or even set in-game commands. Now over to the MacBook Pro. There's no RGB, obviously. The keyboard is backlit, but there is a bit of bleeding around the keys, and they're noticeably dimmer than the Blade 16 even at maximum brightness. The keys themselves are low profile, and I mean very low profile. Key travel is minimal, and while some people love how shallow and fast they feel, personally, I find it a little unsatisfying. It bottom mounts quickly, and it just lacks that tactile feedback that I'm used to on some of the other gaming laptops. But they are consistent, plus you also get Touch ID, which is built into the power button, and it is genuinely useful. I mean, it makes logging into the OS effortless. It works with secure payments, and it ties right back to Apple's whole walled garden experience that I talked about earlier. Then there is the trackpad, and this is arguably where the user experience it just splits hard. So the MacBook Pro's massive Force Touch trackpad is still best in class. It's ultra precise, perfectly responsive across the entire surface area. I've edited countless videos on it, and it's been dead reliable. I have to appreciate the optimizations Apple has done with their hardware and software. It just makes sense. They control it all, and it, again, just works. The Blade 16's glass trackpad, on the other hand, man, where do I start? It's been a complete headache. Now, about half the time, it's smooth and responsive. The other half, it's like trying to catch a mouse hiding in your basement. It's jumpy, unpredictable, sometimes slow to respond. Sometimes it actually doesn't even work. It flat out refuses to respond to my gestures. And it's not just me. There's a whole Reddit thread with people sharing the same frustration. And that right there sums up a big part of the experience. Because when you look at a laptop, you want to make sure everything sort of works cohesively. The Blade 16 has raw power and it's gamer focused, but it still stumbles on the basics. The MacBook Pro might not be as exciting on paper, but it nails the fundamentals, and it does so consistently. Now, displays play a massive role in the overall laptop experience, especially if you're a bit of a display nerd like I am. Look, I'm obsessed with bright, color-accurate screens, and if they're smooth too, even better. So if you're dropping $4,000 on a laptop, you'd expect the best of the best. And thankfully, both the Blade 16 and the MacBook Pro 16, they deliver, but in completely different ways. So these two displays are what I'd call polar opposites. The Blade 16 comes with a Quad HD Plus OLED panel at 240 Hz. It's fast, vibrant, has those deep inky blacks that OLEDs are known for. Meanwhile, the MacBook Pro features a high-resolution 3.4K mini-LED 120 Hz panel with the optional nano texture feature that really cuts down reflections. Now that nano texture option is underrated. It's a specialized matte coating etched directly into the glass, and it makes a big difference when you're working in brighter and uneven lighting conditions. Compared to the Blade 16's glossy OLED, the MacBook is just way easier on the eyes, especially in tough lighting conditions. I have to say the nano texture option on the MacBook Pro is a bit of a high maintenance task because you need to use a very soft microfiber cloth to clean the actual surface. The Blade, on the other hand, it's a smooth glossy screen while it being super reflective, a simple swipe with just a simple or something basic, a basic towel, it gets the job done. On the color front, Apple's move to quantum dot mini LED covers 99% of the P3 color gamut, which is excellent, but the Blade fights back hard. So Razer has actually partnered with Kalman to properly tune the OLED panel, giving it not only a wider Adobe RGB coverage, but even better color accuracy. Our Blade unit clocked in at a delta E of 0.52 compared to 0.82 on the MacBook Pro. Now on the brightness front, the MacBook Pro takes the win. Our sample sustained over 600 nits of peak SDR brightness, while the Blade's OLED maxed out around 400 nits. Now when it comes to refresh rate, the Blade 16 should have the upper hand with that 240 Hz panel, and it does. When you plug it in and start gaming on it, it is awesome. But here's the catch. On battery, it automatically drops to 60 Hz. The MacBook Pro, on the other hand, stays locked in at 120 Hz, whether if it's plugged in or not. That consistency makes a difference during day-to-day use. When it comes to PWM flicker, the MacBook Pro has the clear advantage thanks to its mini LED panel. There's virtually no flicker, even at lower levels, making it a safe pick for those who are sensitive to eye strain, especially at lower brightness levels. The Blade 16, on the other hand, does exhibit some PWM flickering. You'll notice thin black scan lines at lower brightness settings. It's not as aggressive as what you'd see on some other cheaper OLED panels, but it's still definitely present, especially if you're flicker sensitive or working long hours in dim environments. So the Blade's display, it's gorgeous, it's fast, and it's tuned for gamers and creators as well. It's a bit too saturated for my liking, which is why I'm more leaning towards the MacBook Pro's panel, because it's a lot more versatile, it's brighter, it's just better in every lighting conditions, it's more consistent overall, and again, this nano texture feature is just incredible. I mean, look, you can't really see any of these reflections, whereas the MacBook Pro is just, wait, no. MacBook Pro, Razer Blade 16. This is what the webcam looks like on the Razer Blade 16. It's a 1080p sensor, and this is what the microphone sounds like. And this is what the webcam looks like on the MacBook Pro 16, and this is what the microphone sounds like. Let me know which one looks and sounds better. Both these laptops have front-facing speakers. I believe the Razer Blade 16 has 6 of them in total, including some at the bottom. I have to say the MacBook Pro takes the edge here. I don't know what Apple did to their driver tuning with the speakers, but it just sounds a lot more boomy. There's just a lot more volume, and the trebles, they sound more crispier compared to the Blade 16. But either way, they're both awesome options for, you know, that on-the-go entertainment if you want to watch a movie with some of your friends on the couch. They both get the job done. Okay, so upgradability is a big part, especially a big deal for laptops that are aimed for professionals. Your workflow can evolve over time, and ideally, your system should be able to grow with it. Unfortunately, the MacBook Pro is a complete dead end in that department. Everything from the storage to the memory is soldered directly onto the motherboard. So whatever specs you configure or choose at checkout, you're locked into that for life. No second chances. The Blade 16 offers a bit more flexibility, but it's still a mixed bag. On the plus side, you get 2 M.2 slots, giving you the ability to expand the storage up to 8 terabytes, which is great, but like the Mac, the memory is still soldered. That said, you can configure the MacBook Pro with up to 120 gigabytes of unified memory, which, let's be honest, is already more than enough for most of demanding creative or AI workloads. It's just preloaded for the future. Meanwhile, the Blade, it tops out at just 64 gigabytes, which is still plenty for gaming, editing, and most pro applications. I mean, look, this all comes down to trade-offs. These machines are pushing the limits of performance and portability. So to keep them super thin and compact, some compromises had to be made. Just make sure that, you know, when you spec them right from the start, do it according to your workflows, because there's just no turning back. All right, time for the best part of this video, performance. Now, I'm going to be breaking this down into a few categories, so it's just easy to follow. We'll look at real-world CPU workloads, GPU-accelerated tasks, creator-focused benchmarks, local AI testing, which is becoming a big deal lately, and of course, gaming. Yeah, we're gonna get there. Let's kick things off with Cinebench 2024, just to establish a baseline. And here, the M4 Max in the MacBook Pro is 73% faster than the Ryzen AI 9 HX370 in the Blade 16. And to be fair, The Blade was running in performance mode with 75 watts allocated to the CPU, while the Mac is just sipping back around 52 watts. Single core performance, again, the MacBook Pro dominates here, and you actually feel it beyond synthetic tests, especially when I use these laptops side to side. The Blade, it turns itself into a bit of a sloth the moment it's unplugged. Simple actions like opening File Explorer or just navigating within the export settings of Adobe Premiere's render output, it takes significantly longer. Meanwhile, the MacBook Pro stays full throttle, plugged in or not. Switching to real-world CPU stress tests like Blender and Houdini, the HX370's 24 threads do their best, but the M4 Max, it just steamrolls here. Apple's silicon architecture combined with its memory system just eats these tasks for breakfast. Now in Photoshop and Lightroom, where there's a mix of masking, some generative AI, and a batch of raw exports, Apple's deep optimizations with Adobe really shine. The Mac feels more responsive, faster to apply edits, and it's just quicker to export. That said, creator workloads are where things get really interesting. When it comes to video editing, both systems are neck and neck. One of NVIDIA's biggest flexes is the third generation NVENC encoders on the RTX 5090, which drastically improves render times in Premiere Pro and DaVinci Resolve. But even then, the M4 Max often pulls ahead in Resolve thanks to Apple's crazy good metal acceleration. And speaking of GPU accelerated tasks like Handbrake or GPU rendering in Blender, the RTX 5090 is no joke. It's powerful, fast, and it can chew through complex scenes in no time.
Now, render times convey one part of the story, but the remainder actually revolves around the editing experience. I feel like that's what sort of encapsulates whether or not if these laptops are worth your investment. So for me, I need that instantaneous playback performance when I move the markers within the timeline. So I have DaVinci Resolve project open on both these laptops, and the Blade 16, it's fairly fast. It's plugged in, of course, because that's where you get the most amount of performance. If I start playing back, again, this is full resolution. It takes maybe a millisecond to catch up, whereas the MacBook Pro, it's super fast. It's right there. It starts, I would say both of them are fairly equal when it comes to timeline performance when they're plugged in. Now, this next test is very interesting. I'm going to unplug both these laptops, and I've opened Adobe Premiere, which is another editing application with our usual project file. And the Blade just takes forever to catch up with the marker. For example, if I'm playing back right over here, it does drop frames significantly, as you can see with this file over here. It's really, really hard to catch up. I feel like the 5090 just turns itself into a sloth. You certainly have to drop down the resolution to maybe 1/4 to be able to at least get something. But even then, it still starts to skip frames. Whereas the MacBook Pro, I'm on full resolution right over here. There's absolutely no drop frames. It's perfectly smooth, perfectly fine. I can zoom in and out. What's even interesting is that it retains that 120 Hertz refresh rate, whereas on the Blade 16, it kind of goes back to 60 Hertz, again, in order to preserve battery, but also the performance takes a huge dive.
Speaking of which, performance on battery is another important part of our laptop testing methodology, and this is where the MacBook Pro, it continues to impress. Whether if it's Handbrake, Lightroom, or Resolve Studio, this thing, it just delivers nearly the same performance unplugged as it does when plugged in. The Blade 16, on the other hand, takes a massive hit. In Resolve Studio, for example, render times jump from 4 minutes and 46 seconds plugged in to over 7 minutes on battery, despite the app leveraging those shiny new NVENC encoders. Lightroom and Handbrake show similar slowdowns as well. I should also point out that I didn't include this in the chart, but the same Adobe Premiere project that was rendered on the Blade 16, it took about 4 to 5 minutes to render. On battery, it took more than an hour to complete on the Blade 16. That's how bad it is. So if you need consistent, reliable performance, even when you're not near an outlet, it's an easy win for the Mac. Now, if you're someone who's getting into local AI workflows, this is where the Blade 16 pulls ahead. With 24 gigabytes of VRAM, the RTX 5090 is incredibly well suited for running local LLMs, Stable Diffusion, and other AI models without needing to offload to the cloud. NVIDIA's CUDA and Tensor cores, along with their mature software stack, it gives you the flexibility of fine-tuning these models. Gaming is a conversation Apple's been trying to enter lately, but let's be honest, they're moving at a painfully slow pace. Take Cyberpunk 2077, for instance, right? The developers made a huge deal about it coming to macOS last year. There were demos, press coverage, even early builds running on the Mac Studio, but months later, still no sign of a proper release or any updates. So if gaming is even remotely a priority for you, or at least if that's your top priority, the answer is simple. Go with the Blade 16, or honestly, any other gaming laptop with a discrete GPU running Windows. Apple's still not there yet. That's just a fact. But that said, I was really curious. What happens if you try a head-to-head comparison between the M4 Max versus the RTX 5090? Now, obviously, I couldn't run our full suite of gaming benchmarks because most of them just don't natively run on macOS. But I was able to run a few 3D Mark tests, and yeah, no surprise, the Blade 16 walks away with a clean win. It's not even close. But still, it does make me wonder, what if Apple gave the M4 Max a little bit more headroom, maybe a little bit more power, better thermal management? Could that gap start to close? Maybe, but that's a speculation. Now, I did manage to run a few native games on the MacBook Pro. Baldur's Gate 3, for example, at Quad HD+, 120Hz. The M4 Max averaged around 70 frames per second compared to around 110 frames per second on the Blade 16 with identical settings. I have to say I was pleasantly surprised with the experience on the Mac. It was surprisingly smooth and the visuals look fantastic. You do get an even better experience on the Blade with its 240Hz refresh rate and of course, all the performance coming out of that 5090. Total Warhammer 3 on the other hand, the M4 Max, it hovered around 60 frames per second, while the Blade 16, it stayed well above 100 frames per second. So yes, the MacBook can game, and it's not a terrible experience. But if gaming is your thing, I repeat, the Blade 16 is the way to go. But when you pack this much power into a thin chassis, the big question becomes, are you sacrificing thermals or fan noise to get there? Both laptops have solid cooling solutions, and they actually hold up surprisingly well under load. If you're concerned about surface temperatures, don't be, they're very close to each other. Most of the heat gets exhausted out the back, and even under heavy workloads, the WASD region stays relatively cool to the touch. Razer did make some meaningful upgrades this year. The Blade 16, it features an updated vapor chamber cooling system, and they've swapped in a new thermal interface gel, which certainly helps with the heat transfer from the CPU and the GPU. But here's where things start to split. Fan noise. Check it out. Well, if you're editing videos, coding, or just trying to get work done in a quieter space, the MacBook Pro is the best choice. It's near silent most of the time, and even when the fans do kick in, it's a low, sort of controlled hum. The Blade 16, on the other hand, you'll definitely need to wear some really good noise-canceling headphones. Whether you're gaming or exporting a video, the fans, they just ramp up aggressively. It's not unbearable, but yeah, something to keep in mind. Okay, so battery life, this is another important part when shopping around for a laptop. The MacBook Pro has a slightly larger 99.9 watt-hour cell versus the Blade 16's 90 watt-hour cell, so it is at a slight disadvantage. Now, in our light load web browsing tests and YouTube playback tests at 150 nits, the MacBook lasted nearly 18 hours, while the Blade topped out around 10 to 11 hours. Now, of course, I have to say, with the Blade 16, that uplift in runtime is thanks to the Ryzen CPU, because if they did pair it with an Intel Arrow Lake HX processor, I don't think those numbers would have been 10 or 11. It would have been more like 7 or 8, or probably even less. So kudos for that combination. But still, the difference, I mean, that's almost a full workday of extra runtime with the MacBook Pro. Ironically, in Cinebench, where the CPU is fully stressed, the Blade does last longer, but that's because it feeds the CPU with much less power, resulting in lower performance. The last topic that I wanted to share is the software, or I guess the OS experience. Now, this is where the MacBook Pro and the Blade 16 start to feel like they come from two very two entirely different planets, obviously. Let's start with the Mac OS. If you're already in the Apple ecosystem, you've got the iPhone, the iPad, AirPods, everything just works, right? Handoff, AirDrop, universal clipboard, iMessage on your laptop. The integration is seamless and it actually is very useful. It's pretty stable and fast. There's not a lot of bloatware stuff other than Apple Intelligence, which was a complete flop, but that's a video for another day. Updates are on your own terms. You install them when you want them, not when your system suddenly decides you need a quick restart that takes 45 minutes. Windows 11, on the other hand, brings more flexibility. You've got a broader app compatibility, especially in fields like architecture, engineering, and 3D modeling, where legacy software or plugins are still Windows only. And of course, game support is unmatched. You can run emulators, niche plugins, stuff that would never fly in Apple's walled garden. But Windows has its own caveats. Updates often feel intrusive. You might be in the middle of a deadline and suddenly it's like,
seriously, auto-updating now?
How long till impact?
11 minutes and 44 seconds.
Microsoft!
There's also this whole thing about Copilot, recall, and all this AI stuff that's being pushed to our faces. It feels like Microsoft is throwing features at the wall, hoping that something sticks. Sometimes I just feel like I want a clean, stable OS that boots up fast, searches intelligently, that's very important, and it just stays out of my way with less friction. So what's the takeaway? Well, your workflow might pick your OS for you. So if you're someone who values reliability and wants a machine that fades into the background and just, want to get work done without constant driver issues, trackpad weirdness, or performance hiccups, the MacBook Pro is still the better overall pick. The fact that it holds up together while still being on battery is a testament to Apple's incredible hardware and software optimizations, and of course their engineering as well. But if you're in that hybrid demographic where gaming is important and you also need that broad app support, Windows is where it's at. There is no wrong choice here, guys, because one of these machines is probably more you. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you were able to take away something from this comparison. I'm Ibor with Hardware Canucks, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. And of course, don't forget to spend responsibly. I don't think the Blade 16 likes the MacBook Pro at all. I mean, check this out. I mean, I'm trying to, unify these guys, give it a little bit of that bonding moment here, but nope, doesn't. Turns out the display and it goes back to sleep, turns it back on. Here, I'll try it again. Beep.